Trauma. Everyone has it. No one talks about it. It seems easier to stay silent, ignore it, or stuff it than it does to honor it, learn from it, and finally heal. Trauma is debilitating, yet so often we suffer in silence. Trauma is not meant to be battled alone, and we are no longer going to suffer in silence. Together, we are creating a safe place to speak, to share our stories, and grow our strength as we heal. Together, we are giving a voice to those who have been silenced, bringing darkness into light, and letting God use our stories. Today, we find ourselves again. We relight our spark and let it light up the world. Stop SIS is a nonprofit organization dedicated to educating on issues of trauma and trafficking, as well as the amazing power of the healing journey. Welcome to Stop SIS.
All right, so here we go. Hey, Rachel. We meet again.
You.
I know. I can't thank you enough for being on today. Rachel just accepted an amazing new role. Do you want to just share just briefly about what your new role is that you're doing so people kind of know who you are?
Sure, yeah. So for the last 10, 11 months, we've been serving women in illicit spas, kind of just on our own, taking them gifts and loving on them. And Scarlet Hope Nashville is a ministry that goes and serves women in strip clubs. And so that was just something that they basically were doing the same thing we were, but we're in strip clubs. And I got the opportunity to meet with the founder. And she was like, I have been wanting to go into illicit spas, but you're already doing it. How can we join forces? And sure enough, we prayed about it and God moved. And now they aren't just going in strip clubs, they are now going in illicit spas. And I get to be the leader of that.
Yay. And I am so honored to be part of this. I am so honored that you asked me because as you know, I went on a retreat with Rachel and we did a whole day. It was my first time ever going to an illicit spa. And even as a trafficking survivor, and maybe because of I was a trafficking survivor, it was really hard for me, as you know.
Oh, yeah.
And my worst fear is that we're going to run into a trafficker. And you said, no, it's never happened. And what happened?
We ran into a trafficker first time, and so far the only time that has happened.
Well, you know what I love about you? Rachel prayed over him, right? Like I wanted to go up and lay into him. Like that's my and you just have such heart for Jesus. I love this about you. You held his hands and you prayed for him. It was the
Now,
most
let
oh,
me just share God's grace in this a minute because I prayed for him before I realized he was a trafficker. I just wonder if my prayer would have been different or whatever. But at that
oh
time,
wow.
yeah, at that time, I thought he was a John. I thought he was a buyer, which, isn't great. But then it wasn't until after the prayer when he talked with me that I realized, oh, this is him. This is the
Hmm.
trafficker.
Yeah, and I was standing off to the side with a couple of the other retreat
I
participants and
wish we could show the picture right now. You know, because it was hysterical and cool and mind-blowing. I don't
well, you
know.
know what? Maybe can you send me the picture and I'll have
Yes.
Steve put the picture up there because I think
Yes.
it's important for people to see what a trafficker looks like.
Yes.
You have this vision, this Hollywood vision in your head of what a trafficker looks like, and you might be surprised when you see this guy. Like he looked kind of like a grandpa.
Well, yeah, he did. He did. But boy, there was an evil
Oh, there was
smile
an
and
evil.
look about him.
And the whole time, because you couldn't see because your eyes were closed. In the picture, you'll see your eyes are closed and his eyes are open.
Mm,
And he's smirking. And it's that evil, I saw it in my trafficker's face, that evil smirk.
yep.
And what did he say to you after?
Oh, well, I will say he cursed me is the way that I believe it
Hmm.
went. But first he said, My name is Michael. What's your name? And I said, I'm Rachel. I'm here to love on the women inside of here. And that's when he was like, oh, well, I know them very well. In fact, I'm the one that brought them here from China. I'm the one that takes them to the airport and to the grocery store and all those things. And then he again says, my name is Michael, the son of Zebedee, the son of Malachi, the son of, and just goes through this line and then looks at me and says, welcome to Babylon.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes, do you understand? And I said, yes. And he kind of just threw his hands at me and turned and walked away.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back to the car with all you ladies and I sat down and I was shaken up like I knew that was a curse, that was of Satan. But
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, I was like, I'm covered in the blood of Jesus. And I
Yes.
shouldn't be the one that's scared. He should be
Mm-hmm.
the one that's scared.
Exactly. That was, yeah. I don't even have the word. I'm so glad that you shared that story. I know we didn't plan on sharing that. I knew this would happen. I just think it's so important for people to realize that, and also those illicit spas are just in strip malls next to Kroger, Publix, your grocery stores. People are coming in and out like nothing's happening. There's a trafficker in the parking lot, and you prayed over him. And uh, I I was so thrilled to be there. I never thought I'd say that. I really was though, because we both remembered, we didn't realize, we've always known this. We remembered traffickers are cowards.
Right? Yes. Yes, they are. And they don't want to be seen and they don't want to be known. They're squirrely men that, yeah, they're just downright cowards. And
Hmm.
I think for both of us, we got a little bit of our power back that day.
Oh, you just gave me chills. I have chills right now. Anytime I feel the Holy Spirit's around,
Yes.
I get chills. That
Yes.
that is how I would put that exactly. And I know that that is why God led me on that retreat. That was the sole purpose. The one thing I did not want to do that I was resisting, right?
Mhm.
And my
Yeah.
worst fear happened. And I want to talk about that because we have something in common that shocked me when I first met you. And I know that God, I praise Jesus every day, Rachel, for bringing you into my life. You're this
Mhm.
beacon of hope and light, and truly to know that I am not suffering alone in silence. I don't have to live in shame and silence anymore. Because when I first met you, well, first of all, we met in a very God-like way. I'm not going to get into the story, but it was a total God moment. The reason that we even know each other,
Yes.
he just used someone else to connect us, and only his way, only he can
Yes.
do this.
Yes.
And we sat there at a coffee shop, and I don't remember what you said. And you're Rachel, just sweet, kind, open, safe way, share your heart with me kind of thing. And I think one of the first things I said was, I was like this, I felt like shame as I was saying it. I was married when I was trafficked. And you said something I never imagined. You
I
said,
said, me too.
I was, what? You completely shocked me in a good way. And I
Yeah.
felt God so strongly. I felt like Jesus was sitting there right next to us, right? Just going, you see? And just telling me you're not alone, Lisa. You don't have to live in shame and silence. I thought it was my fault. I thought I was a willing participant because, as you know, that's how they groom you, right? So I can't thank you enough for those two words that you said to me, Rachel, have impacted me, and it's why I'm speaking out now.
Oh, God is amazing. And well, okay, I'm going to back up just a tiny bit because as you told me that day, and I think this is important, you asked God to show you somebody else who had been trafficked, who had been married.
I
You
did.
asked him. And sometimes we don't ask him of those
Mm-hmm.
things. We
Mm-hmm.
think it's too little. It's not going to be a big deal to God, but you flat out asked him, "Please show me somebody
Mm-hmm.
else." And he did.
I begged him because I said, The devil's telling me so many lies right now. He has a stronghold on my mind and my heart, and it's keeping me stuck." And yeah, he revealed you. He's like, "Here you go." The other thing I want to say, another way that you had a huge impact on me, and I can't thank you enough for, we were driving up to the retreat that we were going on, And said something about my trafficking and my trafficker. And I said, well, that's how I got myself in trouble. And you
Ah,
said, are you blaming yourself for being trafficked? And I said, well, isn't it my fault? Like I was still in that it's my fault. I was a willing participant. I contacted him.
hmm.
And then like you shared your story with me about what happened. So wherever you want to start the story of how did it happen that you were a married woman, and also kind of set the scene, right? That I want to make it clear your husband was not the trafficker.
Mhm.
This is not that episode. This is not
Yep.
the, because that does happen where
Oh, way
someone
too often.
way too often. I want to put that out there. So for whoever is going through that, we want to recognize you. That's not this though. So if you could just set the scene however you feel comfortable, what was going on in your marriage before you got trafficked, and just tell us how that happened. Because people, I know there's women out there watching us going, oh,
Yeah.
maybe that's what's happening to me. And they don't
Yeah.
even know it. They don't even have
Yeah.
the word for it.
Yeah. Well, for me, I really do. I have to go back quite a bit to when I was 9. That was when I was first groomed and tricked by a school teacher and my basketball coach. He was a fourth grade teacher. He was the varsity basketball coach for the junior high. He was an elder of a local church. And I mean, just this all around amazing man to everybody that saw him, on the outside. Um, Perfect predator, right?
Hmm.
He not only had groomed me, but he had groomed the entire community into believing he was a safe individual. And so when me and my family moved to this town, we moved because my dad was the new head preacher at the one of the local churches, not the same as my coach. And we moved to this new town, and from the get-go, this guy is honed in on me. And what begins to, in the beginning, feels nice. It's like the love bombing, the tons of
Hmm.
compliments, the special attention. He would get me out of class. I would, miss having to do work. I would sit behind his desk and he would talk to me about my dreams and my goals and who I wanted to be, and that nobody understood me like he did. Eventually it led to him touching me, which it started with him using basketball, using the idea of getting stronger for basketball as his reason for feeling muscles on my body, which the first time then that he touched me inappropriately, I remember jumping and tears filling my eyes and him saying, whoa, 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 that was an accident. I didn't mean to do that. Why are you acting like a baby? And me thinking, oh, of course he didn't mean to do that. Why am I
Hmm.
acting like a baby? And this just started and opened the door then for secrets and him explaining to me like what we have is special. If you tell somebody, then he would lose his wife, he would lose his job, he would lose his kid. And I didn't want to hurt him. That was just that whole grooming process where he took ownership of my heart and then my mind, my soul in many ways, and then my body eventually. And once he had done that, and once the sexual abuse really took off, I didn't have any fight left in me. I didn't have a voice. Shame kicked in. And so mostly the way that it happened as a kid, I would either go to his house or I would be taken to a house out in the country. And I won't go into all those details, but I was sold as a child. I was sold to people in the community. Um, Not usually people that I recognized, but some I did. And it was in those early years that I learned how, or I just naturally dissociated, which is where I basically just went somewhere else in my mind. All of those terrible moments of abuse and trauma
Hmm.
just hid away somewhere. And when I was going about my everyday life, it wasn't in the forefront of my mind. I didn't realize all that was taking place. I knew that I hurt. I knew there would be times when like flashes would come in front of my eyes that didn't make sense. It would be a different man standing over me or something, but I didn't know what was going on. And I definitely didn't know my coach was the one doing the hurting. I saw him as the one loving me.
Hmm.
And
That's
this,
really important, actually. I just want to stop right there.
sure.
I want parents, if they're listening, to understand what you just said. And just women, it's that make me feel special. If someone asked you there back then, Rachel, is anyone in your life hurting you? Is your coach hurting you? What would you have said?
No, absolutely not. Number
Hmm.
one, because I was going to protect him, but number two, because I saw it as love. And I
Hmm.
couldn't even remember the deep, dark things at that moment. My childlike brain
Hmm.
couldn't hold that. But if somebody would have asked me, who makes you feel special?
Bingo. Yep. And I can't drive that home enough.
Yeah.
That there's so many points that you just hit on, right? He was the perfect guy in the community, an elder in the church, the basketball coach, upstanding family man. You are a preacher's kid. That
Hmm.
doesn't happen to preacher's kids.
Right?
I have chills right now because I just know that this is going to reach people. And I pray, that's my prayer, is that these words reach the right people so
Yeah.
that we can help them. Because as we know, there's no rescuing. Like, who rescued you? That's a question I get a lot. How did you get rescued? So I'm going to ask that. I already know, right? Because I tell people, like, can we eliminate that word? That's the Hollywood version. Because that's what people are going to want to know, right? So who rescued you from that coach?
Hmm. Well,
Let's
let me
just
keep
touch
going
on
with
that.
my story. Let me keep going and we'll get to all that. Okay, so I mean, it was pretty bad throughout my fourth, fifth, sixth grade year, seventh and eighth grade year. Him and I were still in a relationship, but that we had moved, so I was not in close proximity to his house, and just some other dynamic things that didn't that made it to where I wasn't being as abused at that time. So I remember then my seventh grade year. Flashbacks were coming. I had already started cutting because I hurt, but I didn't know why. It didn't make sense. And I remember coming forward and telling friends, which I will say this till I'm blue in the face. That is often who kids will tell is their
Hmm.
friends first. Well, the friends did the right thing. They went to a teacher who went to the principal, and she then called my parents. And I remember being sat down on my mom's bed. I remember her saying, Rachel, this is what was just told to me. And I said, yes. And she said, you're lying. And I said, no, Mom, I'm not. And she said, yes, you are. You're lying. And I said, Mom, I'm really not. And she said, yes, you are. You're lying. And I remember sitting there thinking, the flashbacks that were in my head didn't make sense anyway. Maybe I am. Maybe something's wrong with me. Like it didn't make sense. And I said, okay, fine, I'm lying. And from that moment, I was then taken to the house of one of the men who had paid for me and hurt me and raped me, who I had voiced as one of the men that did. I was taken to his house and I had to apologize to him in his living room while he cried like a baby. Couldn't believe I would say something like that about him. And there's just a lot of shame that was then thrown at me in a way that you don't recover from
Hmm.
easily. And I just remember thinking, this is something I can't talk about again. And there were a few people through the years that I would kind of share bits and pieces with to see if they were safe enough to handle it because still so much confusion on what had taken
Hmm.
place. But by my freshman year, then I go off to high school. Him and I, my coach and I, no longer have contact really at that point. And it was weird. Like, I thought we were in some sort of a relationship, something, and now he wanted nothing to do with me. It was very weird. And of course, I don't have anybody to talk to about that. And I just remember my coping skill for the most part at that point became basketball. That was what
Hmm.
I threw myself into. And I went on to college. I got a Division I scholarship. Again, not something you would think of with a trafficking survivor. Got my college degree and then got married. And I was teaching. And then 2 years into teaching, I had my oldest son. And that's when I decided to become a stay-at-home mom. So let's then looking at about 2014. At this point, I have two kids, let's see, 2.5-year-old and a 6-month old. And I remember I was at home and I was scrolling through Facebook, and a friend of mine had posted a painting that her daughter had done. And her daughter was in sixth grade and went to the same grade school that I did. And the mom put in the comments below, "Thank you to my coach for spending time after school with her daughter to work on this painting." And in that moment, all of these memories started flooding back. All those ones I had dissociated from just started hitting me one right after the other. And I remember going in the bathroom and throwing up. And the entire day, it was just like puzzle pieces that were finally being put into place that made sense as to why I struggled with the things that I did. But at the same time, coming to grips with the reality of just how bad this had gotten.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember my husband walking in the door, and I was broken and falling apart and having to try somehow to explain this to him. And I remember it being way above what any husband could comprehend or understand. I had started cutting. I had my eating disorder like went through the roof. I was bulimic and anorexic and binging, purge, like all the things, anything that I could do to get the pain in my gut to go away. And his response was, you need to get counseling. And so I did start to get Christian counseling, and as I was talking to that lady, I remember still feeling like I needed to protect my coach. Like here I
Mm-hmm.
was knowing he's a terrible human being. He did awful things to me, but some sort of hold on me that I felt like I had to protect him. And she worked and worked on me with like, "Rachel, he can't be protected. He needs to be found out. And we need to make sure that little girl's okay." And I was all about that. I did want to make sure that
Mm-hmm.
little girl was okay. But it was funny because at the same time, I didn't want to get my coach in trouble. And so it was just this battle within me. Eventually we did an anonymous tip to the, child and services, whatever, protective services. And they went into the school. I know that they interviewed him, my coach, asking, "Have you hurt anybody?" He said no. And then asking the little girl, "Are you
Mm-hmm.
being hurt by anybody?" And her saying no, which didn't make me feel any better.
No.
It was enough of a tip to that mom where she was like, "Oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't be letting my daughter stay alone with this man at school, when school's over." And so they quit doing these art lessons that he had started with her.
Oh, praise
But
Jesus.
yeah, but the whole report came back unfounded. And what I thought was an anonymous tip was not, because they let him know that it was me that called it in. And it wasn't but maybe 2 weeks later that he showed up at my house. And I remember I was outside in my yard. My two kids were there. At this point, I have an almost 3-year-old and like 11-month-old, and she wasn't even walking yet. And he walked into my yard and I froze. And he
Mm-hmm.
picked up my daughter and he walked into the house. And finally, I came my wits about me and I grabbed my son and we went in the house, and he had put my daughter down, thankfully. And then he turned his attention toward me. And I cannot tell you enough. I was not a 28-year-old woman standing there. I was that 9-year-old little girl who
Mm-hmm.
had initially been introduced to this predator. And
Mm-hmm.
I had no fight in me. And I think he knew it. I think he saw it. And it was from that moment for the next however many years, I mean, just terrible, that things began to take place. I don't know how much in detail, you would want me to go, but
Your
it
comfort level always.
oh, thank you. It initially began with an assault by him and, uh, another person that had been involved when I was a kid. And I didn't want to tell anybody, because I went right back to that same way that it had happened as a kid. I tried to
Mm-hmm.
dissociate. I tried to just push it aside and act like it didn't happen. Like, surely this is not a part of my world again. And I remember after the assault, I was laying in bed and it was midday. And only by the grace of God did I text my counselor and say, I just got raped. And she called me and I hung up. And she called again and I hung up. And I said, I cannot form words right now. Like, I can't
Mm-hmm.
talk. And she said, drive to my office. And so I did. I had a friend who watched my kids for me. And I went to her office and, to the best of my ability, tried to explain what took place. And she said three things: you have to go to the hospital, you have to tell the police, and you have to tell your husband. And all three of those felt impossible.
Mm-hmm.
I thought, this is it. I'm losing my husband. I'm losing, because there had been some things leading up to it that I didn't tell him about, that I had kept a secret from him. For whatever reason, I clumped him into the same category as my family. He won't believe me. He won't
Mm-hmm.
understand. Um, and so finally I was like, okay, you can tell my husband, because she's like, he deserves to know. And so she called him at work and he came into her counseling office and she told him what she knew. And I remember him falling apart. Like, I'd never seen him cry like that. I'd never seen the anger in his eyes like that. And, right, like, I felt responsible, you
Mm-hmm.
know. I kept wanting to say I'm sorry. Um, and of course, at that point, then I did not have a voice as far as going to the hospital or calling the police. It was what we were going to do. And I understand, but
Mm-hmm.
we went to the hospital, and I remember it was probably about 6 o'clock at night, and I was put in an ER room, and they did not have any female doctors on staff that day, so it had to be a male. I had my counselor and my husband with me, and I was very much in shock, in PTSD, just massive fear over everything. Um, and I remember not feeling safe and coming up with this plan of saying to them, I just need a minute by myself. And so they stepped out of the room, and the hospital room that I was in was connected to another hospital room. And I went out that door and down a hallway and found myself outside of the hospital, ready to run away and never come back. And it luckily, like, I stalled long enough where they found where I was, and got a hold of me and just hugged me. And I was I was so broken. Like, I can't even explain how broken I was. Um, we went through with a rape kit, and the police came and they interviewed me, and I told them to the best of my ability what I could remember. I gave them all of the evidence, like the clothes that I had. Um, and I remember then the officer looking at me and saying, okay, you need to give me the names of the people who did this. And I couldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband looked at me and said, you either tell them the names of who did it, or we're going to have to move away. And I said, then I guess we have to move away. And because there was
Wow.
just no way that I could do it. And so within 2 weeks, we moved an hour and a half away, taking the kids with us. My husband took this real quick, like, job or car sales position. Never had sold a thing in his life. Ended up being the best thing, because he's a fantastic salesman. He now sells insurance and he's fantastic at it.
Oh.
But at the time, it was just the only thing we could find, and we moved away. But over the course of then the years to come, my coach would still enter into my life from time to time, eventually so far to the point where he sold me to somebody else. And I would leave my house in the middle of the night, and I would go and get in a vehicle with random men that I didn't know. And I'd be taken to, whether it was a hotel or just stay in the vehicle, or to a random house out in the country, or a motor home, and would be sold for 3, 4 hours. And then I'd be dropped off back at my house. I would go in the house and I would go to the shower and I would get it off of me, and I would literally crawl back in bed with my husband as if everything was fine. And this went on for, I don't even know how long. Though that type of thing went on for probably 9, 10 months. I
And
don't even know. I couldn't even put the timeline together right now if I tried.
that's okay. We don't need,
Yeah,
I want to
but
point out that's very common too. Like
well,
the
yeah,
disjointed, right? When it's hard to put it all together, like tell a story. That's why your book, I've read your book, but hearing you speak to me in this, you know, little bubble that we're in right now, it's even more impactful.
yeah.
I feel like I'm there with you, like living this out with you, walking this out with you.
Well, and I know like one of the things that I felt very heavy was I didn't have a choice. This was the only way to protect my family because they had made it clear that they would hurt them, kill them,
Mm-hmm.
destroy them, all the things. And so in my mind, I this was what I had to do to protect my
Mm-hmm.
family. Um, and I remember at times driving down the street and telephone pole after telephone pole going past and thinking if I hit one and end my life, it'll be the best thing for everybody.
Mm.
And the only thing that kept me from doing that was knowing somebody would have to tell my kids what happened to their mom. And I couldn't bear the thought of that. And
Wow.
so that was the only thing that kept me going. And it wasn't, but for however long later, um, I was in church. And mind you, even as an adult, be certain people that I would give little bits of information to, little cries for help,
Mm-hmm.
just to see how they could handle it.
Can
And
you
most,
share with us because I want listeners to, maybe they're hearing this and their loved ones, but they're not recognizing it because cries for help and trauma, our trauma cries aren't what you normally think. It's not like, help, it's not someone's hurting me, right? So can you
yeah,
give an example just for people out there so they can start hearing that and maybe in themselves even?
yeah. Well, I think some physical signs of help or cries for help were I lost a massive amount of weight.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I remember trying on size zero jeans and they were like falling off of me. And people, I know they saw, I know they
Mm-hmm.
noticed, but none of them put together, okay, maybe something is causing this.
Mm-hmm.
I wore baggy clothes and long sleeves and long pants, even in the summertime, because I didn't want people to see cuts and bruises on my body. Um, I I struggled with making sense of time, and I think that goes back to the dissociation and the merging of memories and just like trying to figure out A to B what is going on because you're in fight or flight all the time. So I think those were some things that people could have seen, even just the sadness in my eyes, the distance.
Mm-hmm. Did your husband notice any of those?
He did, and he said he assumed it was from the assault that had happened however long
Mm-hmm.
before. He had no idea things were still going
Mm-hmm.
on. Mind you, he was also grieving that
Mm-hmm.
assault that happened years ago. He was not okay. He needed
Mm-hmm.
help. He was still, in many ways, battling with even just frustration toward me of why didn't you fight back harder? Why didn't you say something? Why didn't you scream? Why didn't you run? Things that you don't understand until
Mm-hmm.
unless you're in the moment. And so he was in his own set of trauma and not able to fully recognize, of course, and his mind's never going to go to, oh, my wife's being trafficked. That's what's going on. He
Right.
don't think that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, so then this lady in my church, some of the things I would say would just be like, "Hey, would you pray for me? I'm not doing all that well." And I remember her praying and following up with me. And then I remember saying to her, "Hey, I have this eating disorder. Would you pray for me? I'm struggling." Yes, absolutely. And she would follow up with me and check in on me and send me scriptures. And then I remember saying to her one day through text, because that was majority of the time how I could speak, because I struggled with
Mm-hmm.
speaking my emotions. And I just said, "What would you have done if one of your daughters came to you and said she had been hurt when she was a little girl?" And I remember her response was nothing like my mom's response.
Mm-hmm.
And she picked up on the fact that, okay, something probably had happened to Rachel and she dropped everything. She was supposed to teach Awana that night at church and Wednesday night, and she got a sub to fill in for her, and she came to my house and she picked me up and we went for a drive. And I remember her just saying, like, I'm a safe place if you want to talk. You don't have to. Um, but just kind of explaining, like, oftentimes men, they do this because of power.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember saying to her, yeah, or money. And her jaw dropped and she was like, what? I mean, she knew trafficking happened overseas, but she had no idea it
Mm-hmm.
happened here, let alone in her backyard. And at that point, I had only shared enough with her as far as like my childhood stuff that she thought it was in the past until she started to pick up on some bruises that she saw or some different behaviors of mine
Mm-hmm.
that helped her realize this is possibly still going on. And there was one particular time where she was like, okay, that she knew for certain something bad had happened to me the night before. And so she had come to my house and we had somewhat talked, and I had assured her, it's never going to happen again. Like I'm safe. Everything's fine. I promise you, everything's good, as we do. And she left. And that night, I remember I was cooking spaghetti on the stove. I had, kids running around the house. My husband was home, and I hear a knock on the door, and I open the door, and there she stands with her husband. And I'm like, "Oh, hey, what are you doing here?" And she's like, "Your husband deserves to know."
Whoa.
And I panicked, and
Mm-hmm.
I ran and grabbed my car keys, and I went to just bolt, and because that was my way of dealing with things, I just run away. And I tried to run out of the house, and my husband grabbed me and was holding me. And they proceeded to tell him what they knew, what was going on, that I had been assaulted and, you know, potentially had a broken arm, like all these things I had been hiding. And my husband held me and he cried. And I remember him saying, "Rachel, I'm not going anywhere. I'm here.
Wow.
It's going to be okay." And I didn't believe him.
Mm-hmm.
Everything that had been told to me by any person that I had met, whether it was my coach or the person I was sold to or whatever, I would be the one that would go to jail. It would be my fault.
Mm-hmm.
And so as I'm sitting there in my bedroom, and I have this lady that in my book I call Granny, her husband, my husband, I think another friend was there also. They're trying to convince me you need to file a police report. You need to get the police involved. And I kept thinking, I'll be the one that goes to jail. I know I will be. And they're like, there's nothing else you can do. You have to. And so an officer came over that they knew, and I filled out this report. And then it came time for me to sign it. And it took probably an hour for me to sign that paper because I was certain I'm signing myself to go to jail.
Mm-hmm.
As I did sign it, and then that was like a Friday or Saturday, and then that following Monday I had to go to the state police and be interviewed. And I remember Granny taking me and one of my friends, and I get there, and of course these two men, they walk me back to, along this long hallway into this teeny tiny room with a video camera, and one's playing good cop, one's playing bad cop, and wanting to know what happened to me, wanting to see bruises. And so, I'm needing to pull like clothes off and to a degree so they could see, and they didn't have any female on staff that day, and all these different things. Well, it did lead to a raid on my coach's house and another person's house. And I was told that it'll just be a matter of time, like they should be put away. Unfortunately, what I was told would happen, and the fact that I was told that there was child porn found in his house, that there was different evidence found, all of it disappeared over the course of time, and the whole entire case was dropped. And once that happened, we all became unsafe again, and people began showing up at my house again. And I could see the exhaustion in my husband. Like he was trying to provide for our family financially, trying to be the shepherd of our family spiritually, trying to keep me safe physically. and he felt like he was failing at all of it.
Mm.
And I was not a suitable wife in any way, shape, or form. I was so traumatized, still very much easily triggered by these men in the community, um, trying my best to heal, keep myself safe, be a mom. It was true chaos. And I remember police officers at times when we would try to talk to them and tell them, what had just happened, them saying, no, this isn't how trafficking works. You've watched too many movies, but you can't be married and be trafficked. Like, that's not how this works. And I'm here to tell you, anytime you are sold against your will, or whether it's force, fraud, or coercion, that's trafficking. I don't care if you're married. I don't care if you're 2 years old, 100 years old. That's
Mhm.
trafficking. And it does
Mhm.
happen, and there's manipulation that takes place. There's fear that gets induced, and then there's shame and people
Mhm.
that just don't believe you.
Did
And
you see it as trafficking? Was that word on your radar? Because I know it wasn't on mine.
not
Yeah,
in the
when you were in
beginning,
it, were you saying, "Oh, was that your thought process? I'm being
not in the
trafficked."
beginning.
This is
I
important for people to hear.
Oh yeah. Well, and of course, I thought it was my doing. I left
Mm-hmm.
the house.
Mm-hmm.
How can I, how can I charge anybody with something when I appear to willingly walk out of that house and do what I'm told to do, and then not say anything?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it sounds like that's as much my fault as anybody. It sounds like
Sounds like.
a prostitute.
Yeah. And that's the
And
thing is that you're a prisoner you're not chained. They don't have you in chains. It's not the Hollywood version, right? You weren't locked up in a room somewhere. And what you just said. Like, I thought it was my fault. I willingly walked out of the house and did this. People don't understand that part of it. And that's what keeps women just, like you said, cloaked in shame and silence. And then being married on top of it, especially traffickers know that married women are their perfect victims because you have more. This is what I was told by my trafficker. You will keep your mouth shut because you have more to lose.
mm,
You have a husband, you have a kid, you're in the community, you have a church. No one's going to believe you. All the things that you just said, like you just hit on all of those. And still, if you guys are listening, still thank you. And notice there's no rescue, right? There was no, even when you went to the police, this is what I want people to realize. Even when you went to the police, you filled out the paperwork, they did the raid, there still wasn't a rescue. In fact, it was all just, let go.
mm.
That's the worst part. But that's why I'm so proud of you. Your story doesn't end there though. And I mean, I know people that are listening are looking at you going, what? She couldn't form words? Look at how well spoken she is now. Like, I want women to see if no matter where on this path you are, Rachel is a beacon of light and hope. Look at how you are sharing your story. God has given you all the words.
He absolutely has. And yeah, he knew that was not the end of the story. He knew that there was more that he was going to do, and
Hmm.
that all of this, only God could turn it for good. And
Hmm.
he truly, truly has.
Yeah. So what happened in your marriage then? How did it impact your marriage? And are you still healing from it? What's going on with the healing in the marriage?
Well, I feel like both of us had extreme trauma.
Hmm.
It was just a chronic feeling of not being safe, a chronic feeling of the other one, him being fearful of what was going to happen to me, and trust was broken. Um, and even though like he got to the place where he understood that it was the trauma that was causing me to leave, um, there's still like, you don't know if what I'm saying is true. Is this the trauma
Hmm.
speaking? Are you all of a sudden asking to go to Kohl's in a different town because you really need to go to Kohl's in a different town? Or
Mhm.
is this from somewhere else and the trauma speaking and you're going to go meet a guy? Like, I mean, those are the types of things
Mhm.
that was being talked about. And um, I think there was just anger, anger at God, anger at each other, and just pure exhaustion, not sleeping at night, him
Mhm.
trying to stay awake to make sure that I don't leave in the middle of the night.
Mhm.
It just we had, I don't know how much money we spent on like quarters or cameras on around the house and surveillance systems, and they would get destroyed. They were burned with lasers. They were disconnected, all these different things. Um, and everybody, minus a handful of people, I would say, thought we were nuts. And so we were swimming an uphill stream, however you want to say it. Like every odd was against us. Um, I think our kids held us together. That was probably the one of the main things. We didn't want to hurt them. We didn't want to separate for their
Mhm.
behalf. We both had a relationship with God, broken, but we had a
Mhm.
relationship with God, and we both wanted better. And I would say it I- only by the grace of God are we where we are now. Like there's just no
Mhm.
like we did X, Y, and Z and now we're okay. It, not
Those
like that.
secret formulas.
Yes.
Did you go to marriage counseling?
No, we didn't. And I would highly recommend it. I mean,
Mhm.
we just didn't have the money.
Mhm.
We had spent so much money on getting me help, on getting me to doctor's offices for because of the, abuse that I'd had for we had to move. I can't even tell you how many times we've had to move. The amount of money that we've put into trying to keep me safe is insane. We didn't have the money to go to counseling.
Mhm.
We both would seek out mentors. Like I had Granny, he had his set of mentors, and that was, men of the church who stood by him. That was crucial for him.
Mhm.
Being able to support him and encourage him in ways that I couldn't at the time, and encourage us to continue talking and working through these things and trusting again. And I remember there was one point where we were pretty much on the brink of, well, okay, no, I've got to share this story. You got time?
Yeah, we have time.
Okay. So, I we had moved, we had gone to a new town, everything because we were unsafe. I had an advocate who entered my life who was like, I'm going to help get you care. He was
Mhm.
an investigator.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and he was a part of a nonprofit organization. He had originally worked for an organization that is very well known in the trafficking community. He had been a part of the Marines, like all these different things, stand up guy. And he's like, I'm going to help you get you safe. We're going to get you justice, all the things. Well, we moved to his area because I was going to help him in the nonprofit. I was going to work with him. And over the course, not long really, of after us moving here, he started to say, Hey, Rachel, there's some odd things popping up about your husband. And I was like, what do you mean? And granted, my husband's way of coping with things was spending money and like not telling me and like having all
Mhm.
these credit cards
Mhm.
and I had just found out about all like a lot of these things. But this investigator was like, no, like we found some stuff online. I think he might have been a part of selling you and getting money. And we found like these accounts that he has of like hundreds of thousands of dollars in overseas accounts. I think he's a part of trafficking you. You need to get safe. You and the kids need to get like we'll take you down to this secret place in Alabama and nobody will ever know where you are and we'll get you help and freedom. I was inches from it, inches. And whatever, there was in my gut, this can't be true. He has stuck with me this far. I
Mhm.
know the hell he's been through. He's not perfect, but I'm not perfect. Like, there's no way this is reality. And I balked at it and didn't do it. And it came to light that none of what this man had said to me was true. And he went on about his way. Well, then I get a call from US Marshals, not but maybe a year later, saying, Do you know this man? We are finding out that there's a group that takes these women and children to uh, unknown places in Alabama in the South, and people never see them again. And
And you
I'm
were this close
that
from,
close
that's by the grace of God,
by the grace
right
of God.
there.
But I remember we were recovering from that, and Granny said to me, "You either need to leave him or
And
start
your
trusting."
husband, you mean?
My husband, yeah, you either
Mhm.
need to leave him or you need to trust him
Mm,
because you can't stay in the marriage and not trust him.
that's true.
And
That's great advice.
I chose to start trusting him. And
Hmm.
we were open in communication on things. And from that moment, like we found a good church family in our new area that we were living in. And God has grown our faith, He has grown our relationship. Um, we've learned so much through this as far as being real and honest, that
Hmm.
our communication is so much better. It's just, we're not perfect. We still have our issues. I mean, as any marriage does, but um, I think when you've gone through something so horrific together, it does build a bond of, and we chose each other. We chose to not quit.
Yeah, and almost when everyone else is not believing either of you, I imagine that brings you closer together.
I mean, when we moved away for safety and it was really just us two, like we had to lean on each other and we had to
Hmm.
lean on God. And yeah, I think it brought us closer together.
Yeah, there's so much to be said for when a survivor comes forward, like these two words, like I believe you, and then the other, it's not your fault. If we can get people to the point where they can say that, even
Mhm.
if they have doubts in their head or something, right?
Yes,
In that moment,
right.
if you could just say those, there's so much that could happen for healing.
Yeah. Because let me tell you, it's not all going to make sense. It doesn't all make sense to us. Evil doesn't make sense.
No, and in fact, when that task force I was talking to, there was an FBI agent on there, and he was saying how when they're learning now, right, that when they interview women that come forward and say they might not be saying they're trafficked, right? But their story is very disjointed and it really doesn't make sense and they have to ask all these questions. That's when they're like, this woman was trafficked. This, we need to believe her, as opposed to someone who comes in, they're just like, well, then this happened and then this, because it's not like that, right? That's not
No.
the way our trauma brain works, and flashbacks happen. And I thought that was so interesting. I was so happy to hear that he was spreading that awareness that,
Yeah.
you know, when you're asking questions, you can't be interrogating them. Like, show me the bruises, and,
Yes.
right?
Right. Yeah, no, the way, even the way you ask questions, I remember different times being interviewed by law enforcement or whoever it was, but you could tell in their questions it was out of disbelief. And
Hmm.
that makes me shut down and not want to talk and not
Hmm.
trust you.
Yeah. And trust is such a big thing because, as a survivor, your trust is broken over and over again
Yeah.
to someone. And that's all the grooming process, too, right? This person made you feel so special.
Yeah.
And so it's this confusion. They couldn't possibly be hurting me.
Yeah.
I'm special to them.
And just imagine as a kid, like if a kid is
Hmm.
going through that. Oh, I just the assumptions that adults make, you got to remember they're using a
Hmm.
kid brain to be
Yeah.
able to handle such massive
Hmm.
trauma. Like it's not going to come out A to Z, this is what's happening.
And I love the way you said in that moment when your coach showed up again, is when you were a married woman with babies, you were 9-year-old Rachel in that kitchen, and he
Yes.
knew that. And you made me aware of that when I was on your podcast. Rachel has a
Mm.
great podcast, Stop SIS, Stop Suffering in Silence. I love your podcast. I love the name. And it was on that podcast that you and Denise connected it because Denise said, I said something about he hurt me when I was in high school. But then I also said, nothing ever happened to me as a child. I didn't have child sexual abuse. I was Talk about dissociation. On the episode is when I made that connection that the same
Yeah.
guy that trafficked me as an adult was the same guy that hurt me when I was in high school. Never made that connection before. Wrote a book about it. It's in the book. Never made the connection. Been to multiple therapists, counselors. Nobody ever made the connection. In one episode, you and Denise were like, Denise, like, excuse me, it
But
might be a
listen,
trauma bond.
yeah. But that's why community is so important.
Hmm.
And the right community, let me say, is so
Yes.
important.
Yeah. And I thought, because I said, no, no, he knew my family, and that's how they get you, though, right? Because your coach knew your family.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
so I love this episode so much, and I just pray that it gets to the right women who need to hear these words, and parents that need to hear it, spouses,
Yeah.
right? Like our husbands had no clue what was
Right.
going on. And
Right.
then just the critics that come for that whole thing too, there's just so much here. There's so much to unpack here. But what do you want to say to married women in particular that might be going through this right now and don't even realize because you don't fathom. You don't want to identify as a trafficking victim, right?
Right.
So is there anything you want to say to a married woman out there that's going through this?
Well, first of all, I believe you and it's not your fault.
Yes. Yeah, I believe you too, and it's not your fault.
And you're not
Replay that
alone.
over and over, and you're not alone.
Yeah. And there is hope.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like there was no hope when I was
Mm-hmm.
in the midst of all of it. And I had to borrow hope from other people for a while
Mm-hmm.
until I could finally have my own and until I could finally hear God's voice for myself saying, it's going to be okay. Trust in me,
Mm-hmm.
walk with me. Um, and so it's in those dark, dark moments. Look for the hands that are reaching down to help pull you up.
Mm-hmm.
Um, not saying it's going to be perfect,
Yeah.
but um, reach reach for those hands.
I got chills thinking about the t-shirt you gave us on the retreat. That's the graphic. Oh, I love that t-shirt. I get so many questions when I wear that t-shirt. I
Awesome.
love it.
Awesome.
Rachel, do you want to close us out in prayer?
Oh, I would love to. Thank you,
Okay.
Lisa. Dear Heavenly Father, we know that none of this was your initial plan by any means. You never planned for somebody to go through the type of trauma and abuse and slavery that we have just talked about. That's not your plan. Your plan is heaven. But we also know that when we lay it in your hands, you can make beauty out of ashes and you can turn something so dark into something full of light. And that is only by the grace of God that that can happen. I thank you for the healing and the redemption and the transformation that you have done in Lisa and in me. I pray for anybody listening right now who is in one of those dark places, whether they can relate to our stories or their story is slightly different or a lot different. God, I just pray that right now they can feel your loving arms around them and they can know that they're not alone. They can know that there are people out there who understand and that will believe them and will stand with them and will help them through this. God, I pray for hope to wash over them and that they will be willing to speak out and get help. Continue to use Lisa's platform, God, and use this beautiful ministry that she has and the voice that you have given her to touch lives, to touch those who are suffering, and to touch those who need to understand, to be educated. We see you leading her, and we thank you for that. We thank you for the ways that you love us. Thank you most of all for Jesus, and it's in his precious name I pray. Amen.
Amen. And I just also want to close with Jesus was your savior, is our savior,
Present.
right? There's no rescue team coming. It's Jesus that gets us up and out of any situation we are in.
I truly don't know how you could do it outside of Jesus.
Me neither. I don't want to know.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to this powerful episode of Stop Suffering in Silence. If you are interested in booking Rachel to speak at your school, your church, or on your podcast, then please email openblindeyes@protonmail.com. If you are interested in sponsoring a survivor on their healing journey and would like to donate to Stop SIS, then please check out the link in the description box or show notes below, or you can email stopsis@protonmail.com. And finally, if you are currently suffering in silence, or you know somebody who is, whether they're dealing with a current trauma or one from the past, then we will always recommend that you reach out to your local resources and find a counselor that you can trust, because nobody is meant to suffer alone. Have an amazing week, and thank you for being here.